Welcome to Bookish, everybody. Thank you for starting your weekend with us. We're your virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life, produced by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor of premium content here, and I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers and really all of you who come back every month to support our programs. A huge thank you is also due to our program sponsor, the Segerstrom Center for the Arts. The In Conversation series at Segerstrom continues this month, featuring Tara Westover, author of the mega best-selling memoir, Educated, and that's on September 30th at the Renee and Henry Segerstrom Concert Hall. If you go to scfta.org for more information, you're going to be entered for a chance to win 2 complimentary tickets to the series. And speaking of a chance to win, if you are one of our Reader Rewards members here tonight attending Bookish, you are automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate to our partner in one of our favorite independent bookstores, Once Upon a Time Bookstore in Montrose. And speaking of winners, congratulations to last month's winner, Sylvia Thorne. Sylvia, we hope you're enjoying your books. So guys, clearly this is the place to be. So if you're not a subscriber yet, well, why aren't you? Go to scng.com/subscribe and find your local paper. Also, check out our new Bookish swag, which you can order online and show your book nerd pride, which is important. Hey, just a reminder before we get going, if you've got a question, please enter it in the Q&A section of your toolbar. And if you just want to connect with other audience members, use the chat feature found there on the toolbar as well. And don't worry about missing anything from today, because a recording of the show will be sent to you so you can share it or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events. And that's where you can find all of our past virtual shows, as well as see what's coming up. And now it is my extreme pleasure to call in our host, Sandra Singh-Low. You've heard her on NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life and Marketplace. She's also the host of the syndicated Radio Minute, The Lowdown on Science. She's been a contributing editor at The Atlantic, our host for the past 3 years. And wait, she's also the author of 7 books, including The Mad Woman and the Roomba, not to mention her stage shows, which most recently include Mad Women of the West. Welcome, my friend Sandra. Sandra, where are you?
Hello, I'm here. It's so good to see you. Welcome, welcome. And boy, I can't wait until the end of the month of the Segerstrom. It's just going to be a blast. All the book things that are happening in Southern California.
And you are the host of that
I am indeed.
Series as well.
Yes, I'm so excited. So today,
get out of here.
All right, and yes, and I'm recovering. I just got a hip replacement. Thank you. And so I'm hip, which is the theme for our show today. I suddenly decided it's the hip show.
Hip show.
All right, so we'll see you at the end shortly, and we'll roll into our first couple of guests. So exciting. Okay, so in our over 3 years of Bookish, we've never had sibling writers on. So we're going to open our show today with 2 sensational writers who happen to be brothers. They are Lee and Tod Goldberg, or as I like to call them, I'm sure it's been said before, the Goldberg variations we're going to have on today. So I'll do the 30-second download on each before we bring on these fellas. Lee Goldberg, the 30-second download. Lee Goldberg is a 2-time Edgar Award and 2-time Shamus Award nominee and the #1 New York Times bestselling author of nearly 40 novels, including Lost Hills, True Fiction, 15 Monk mysteries, and the first 5 Fox O'Hare books, co-written with an author you might have heard of called Janet Ivanovich. He's also written and or produced many TV shows, including Diagnosis Murder, Sequest, and Monk, and co-created the Hallmark movie series Mystery 101. As an international TV consultant, he's advised networks and studios in Canada, France, Germany, Spain, China, Sweden, and the Netherlands on the creation, writing, and production of episodic television series. He lives with his family in Calabasas, California. We're going to hear about that a bit more, where flames forced his family to evacuate during the recent Southern California wildfires. And fittingly enough, his new book is Malibu Burning. You can hop on the screen, Lee, or wait and listen to the 30-second download on your brother.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, we're doing this so theatrically. Tod Goldberg, the younger brother, the 32nd down one. Tod Goldberg, who's familiar to this program, is the New York Times bestselling author of over a dozen books, including The Low Desert, Gangsterland, Gangster Nation, The House of Secrets, Living Dead Girl, and the popular Burn Notice series. Widely anthologized short fiction collections include Simplify, Other Resort Cities, and The Low Desert Gangster Stories. His nonfiction has appeared in the LA Times, USA Today, and the Wall Street Journal. His essay, When They Let Them Bleed, was selected for Best American Essays. Co-host of the much-lauded literary podcast, Literary Disco. Todd's a professor of creative writing at the University of California, Riverside, where he founded and directs the low residency MFA program in creative writing and writing for the performing arts. His newest book, final installment of the Sal Cupertine series, is Gangsters Don't Die. Welcome, Todd. We got the both of you up.
Hello. Yay. So nice to see you. Lee, it's been so long since I've seen you.
It's so long. You look terrific, Todd.
You look fantastic.
Have you been dieting? Did you have your teeth done?
No.
They definitely look whiter. They look whiter.
As you guys look at that bathtub in Eric Peterson's recent fantastic coverage of you guys, I know you're just doing a book event here in LA, and audience members should know that you're very shy, you're very retiring. This is when, we're worried you're not going to say anything. So I'm going to kind of stand back and let you go. What we're going to do is hear a bit about life and books from you. Of course, growing up, childhood. I'll see you with questions. And then at the end, we'll get to your new books of the moment so you can talk about them directly to our audience. So I think great. I'm going to start with Lee, since 9 years. Yeah, started a little bit earlier.
I need a box of Kleenex. Are you going to make me cry?
We'll see.
Okay.
Growing up Goldberg. Okay. Can you give us a picture? I'm sure you remember it, of growing up Goldberg. We want to know the two parents. What did they do? What was that like? What was your interest in writing, or your, let's say, your servitude in writing, as we might hear?
So I've got the whole hour then. Well, I'll bottle it down to what sounds like a sitcom. Our parents were in the industry, so to speak. My father was a television anchorman on the local CBS affiliate. So we saw him at 6 and 11 o'clock every night, talking like this, not just on screen, but in our home. Lee, how was school today? Please pass the salt. And when he laughed, he would laugh like this. So you never knew if he really found you amusing or not. Now you're laughing now, Sandra, because it's only been about 30 seconds. Imagine your entire life with a father who's totally insincere. How are you, Lee? I'm listening carefully.
I am still
interested in you. And our mom was the Paris Hilton of her day. She was beautiful when she was young, just gorgeous. She was like a fashion model, and she went to all these parties. And since she was going to parties anyway, the local newspaper said, how would you like to write about the parties? My mom was like, oh, go to parties for a living? I'm in. And that was essentially the two of them. They ended up getting a divorce, and I won't bore you with all of that, but we were raised, and I use that term very loosely, by a single mother who partied for a living. So you can imagine what that was like. No coincidence that Todd and I both sought escape in a world of imagination. Not Willy Wonka, but murder, death, crime, violence.
Nice things like that. Yes. Wow. Yeah. And your mother, though, the sounds of if your father talked like that, the sounds of your mother in the evening when she wasn't partying was writing all the time, right? With yes. that Olivetti typing away.
I ended up inheriting that Olivetti. I used that for years too. She was constantly writing, but she was also constantly partying. She also changed her breasts annually. She might as well have had Velcro. She had lots of implants and things. She dated a lot. Look at Todd, he's hiding. It's true. It's true. We heard besides the typing was the Velcro of the new breast implants being removed and added.
Lee does not know how breast implants work.
I know how moms work.
Although I think, speaking of let's say parts of the physical body.
I love this, Todd. This is
great. Can you talk about your first book? Speaking of perhaps not quite realistic body parts and whatever, let's talk about your first book, your first publication.
Well, I wrote a lot of first published book, because I wrote a lot of books when I was a kid growing up, And when I went to UCLA, I put myself through school writing about the television industry and the publishing industry for all sorts of publications. And my journalism advisor was writing crime novels, these big conspiracy thrillers, Robert Ludlum-esque thrillers. And he would show me the manuscripts first, and I would criticize them because I had so much world experience. And I'd criticize the sex scenes, even though I hadn't had sex. I was an expert on everything. And one day, his publisher came to him and asked if he would write a men's action adventure novel, which they don't exist now, but they were like the male equivalent of the Harlequin romance. They had titles like The Destroyer, The Executioner, The Immolator, The Defecator, all ER and OR at the end with some, well, the cover's behind my shoulder there. He told the publisher that he wasn't hungry enough, desperate enough, or stupid enough to write one of these books, but he knew somebody who was, and he recommended me. So at 18, 19 years old, I wrote a book that was published called 357 Vigilante by Ian Ludlow. So I'd be on the shelf next to Robert Ludlum, best-selling writer in America at the time, and Ian for Ian Fleming. So people would go, Ian Ludlow, I think I read something by him. It wasn't bad. And I was very fortunate. My first book came out the same week Bernard Goetz blew away some muggers on a New York subway train. Vigilantes were hot.
Vigilantes were hot. Okay.
New World Pictures bought the movie rights to my book, hired me to write the script, and my career was off and running.
I got lucky. Bernard Goetz killed me.
Todd, you'll get your chance in a moment, maybe in 2 hours, because even finishing this question, okay, and then how did you, was it, I'm just teeing this up for you, Lee, was it a sexy book?
Well, there was some sex in it. I wanted to write a serious literary novel. So my first draft, my hero was impotent. He couldn't get up because every time he started to make love to a woman, he'd think about all the people he killed that day. And my publisher said, Lee, this is a men's action adventure novel. Not only is he having sex, he's having incredible sex. So I was very pissed off about this. So I wrote these sex scenes that defied gravity, that were not physically possible, that were just ludicrous. I mean, he'd look at a woman and she'd collapse in multiple orgasms and need CPR. And I had positions that weren't, you just couldn't do them. I sent this manuscript back into my editor. I didn't hear from him for a while. Then when he finally called, he said, Lee, I just read the new scenes. And I knew what the next words out of his mouth were going to be is, you sarcastic son of a bitch, we're canceling your contract. But no, what he said was, not only were the scenes hot, Lee, they were real. Oh, God, if this is real sex, I'm a complete failure. Oh, God, I felt terrible. And then I had to top those sex scenes in the other books that I wrote. Little did I know the influence these scenes would have on young, impressionable minds, Tod Goldberg.
So, as Todd, I have to say the chat is blowing up, which, like Colleen Casey saying, LOL, LOL. Pat Byrne says, I need to turn on my fan. Amy Wallen says, I've never seen siblings who embarrass each other. Leanne Kirk, though, is on your side. She says, so funny. This is highly entertaining. Ricky Minoka, really, the chat was ridiculous. Hey, all, welcome. Glad to be listening online. Now I feel tempted to look up your no mom jokes, please.
Her name was Jan Curran.
Yeah.
And you haven't lived. I was a teenager when my mom was named one of the 10 sexiest women in San Francisco by the San Francisco Chronicle. So my friends would come to the house because they thought my mom was so hot. And my mom would flirt with them. It was so unbelievably inappropriate. I just wanted to die. Mom, I cannot flirt with my friends. Put on some clothes, please.
This makes us really wonder, and Denise Angarato says, hello, and Megan Beatty says, excited to see the brothers Goldberg in action. That's the two brothers, so let's go to you, Todd, your rebuttal, if you will. So what was it like growing up in this house, your first reading experience, books? Talk to us. How can you answer that?
It's interesting. So Lee had an entirely different childhood than I had, because by the time I was aware of my surroundings, my parents were already divorced. So I only knew my dad as that guy Lee imitated a lot. And we had a surprising number of uncles who were not related to us that were spending the night. That was one of the weird things. Oh, this is Uncle Charlie. If that's my uncle, we got some big questions about what I heard last night. It was an unusual time. To be perfectly honest with you, as a young person, our mother, as Lee indicated, she had a different lifestyle, but she was also probably undiagnosed bipolar at the time too. And Lee and my sister Karen and my sister Linda, all of them are older than me. And they really sort of protected me as a little kid from what was really our mom's madness growing up. And so I really did live in a fantasy world for many, many years. That doesn't mean I wanted to read my first sex scene in a book my brother wrote.
Better than reading it in mom's book.
I do. What I used to do when I was a kid. So I was profoundly dyslexic growing up. I think we talked about this last time I was on the show. And so I didn't really learn to read until I was 10. But by the time I was 10, Lee was publishing a lot. And so I'd go to the mall and I'd go to B. Dalton or Walden Books or whatever, and he'd be in Fangoria or Starlog or something. And I would go to the magazine counter and I'd open up the magazine to his interview with, James Brolin or something, and hope that someone would walk by and say, "Who wrote that fantastic article in Fangoria you're reading?" And I could say, "Oh, that's my brother Lee." But when he wrote 357 Vigilante, I should not have read it. I'm just going to say that. I was 11 years old when that book came out, and there were things in there that no grown man and no young man should ever read from a sibling. There was a sex scene involving Rocky Road ice cream, Sandra. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm a man
Your
who likes
wife
ice
still
cream.
complains about that, Todd.
So this is a book show. It's not an ice cream show.
Right.
So,
Thank God.
Maybe we'll pivot now to the actual book. Two brothers. Obviously, you have some camaraderie there, and I think if I'm going to set up, it's like I'll start with you, Todd, and then we'll go back to Lee.
Okay.
So it's like I think Todd, it's kind of like you have talked about either being a literary writer or not. I think wearing the black turtleneck or not. Now you're at a university, for God's sake, you're a professor, and Lee actually has a career in television. So you kind of are both of a thriller tree, but you're different branches of the same tree. You could talk a little bit about your journey to beginning and sketching middle to where you are now, which will end, and then Lee can go.
Well, I've had a very lucky career. I started. When I really started writing in earnest, which was after college, I was writing short fiction. And almost immediately after graduating from college, I worked for a little while making infomercials, which was not a good job. And it's where Ed McMahon once yelled at me while we were promoting his Ed McMahon Miracle Fryer. If I ever write a memoir, it's going to be, I worked on Ed McMahon's Miracle Fryer essays. But my first book came out in 2000, and it was sort of, I didn't know it then, but it was sort of a noir novel. I thought it was literary genius. It was published by MTV, which should have told me what the book was. And it wasn't until after my second book, which was a book called Living Dead Girl, which I also thought was a literary novel, but was called Living Dead Girl, and the cover had a dead woman in the water, where in fact, Lee told me, you could just start writing crime fiction that people enjoyed reading versus crime fiction that leaves everyone so mordantly depressed. And this was an actual conversation that we had. Like, the books had done well critically and commercially, but I wasn't satisfied. And it was then that I realized, like, you know what? I love crime fiction. It's really what I like to read. It's what I like to write. But it took me several years of really honing my craft, which I did writing burn notice books, before I was really ready, I think, to write these series of novels, the Gangsterland novels, which I think have defined my career and are sort of a combination of literary fiction and genre fiction in a way that's easy for the public to read without feeling like it's too smart. It is a book about a hitman, but it's a hitman who hides out in Las Vegas as a rabbi, though he's not Jewish and obviously not a rabbi. It's just weird enough and just dumb enough to be literary.
Speaking of, Ashley Cat says, for Todd, what's your favorite part of writing the character cell?
That's a great question. Hi, Ashley. Ashley is a former student of mine.
Okay.
my favorite part about writing Sal Cupertine, who is the hitman who hides out as the Rabbi David Cohen, is in fact the battle that he has within him. He pretends to be a rabbi for so long that he in fact becomes a rabbi. And this sort of dawning of faith in him causes him to have such a profound change with the way that he sees the world. He'd always thought that he was just sort of a blunt tool of the mob. And now all of a sudden people come to him for advice and they listen to him. The books are a lot about how organized crime has seeped into every facet of Americana, essentially. But it's also a novel about a man who realizes he is more than he thought he was worth.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back to Lee. So now you're writing books. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, a lot of our audience members are interested in your work in television, which is quite substantial, and sort of going back and forth between the two forms.
Well, they're two very different kinds of storytelling. In television, you move the story forward with what people say and what they do. If you don't see them doing it or saying it, it doesn't happen. And you have to tell a story in 44 minutes, an hour-long show. You have to do it the 4-act structure. Every scene has to have conflict. Every scene has to reiterate the franchise of the show. There's also so many other demands involving budget and how many days you're shooting in and out, and so many other pressures on writing for television. That said, I think writing for television has made me a far better novelist, because my scenes, if they aren't filled with conflict, if they aren't pushing the story forward, if they aren't revealing character, if the dialogue is not revealing story and moving everything forward, I cut it. I'm very aware of pacing. I'm very aware of, unlike Todd, I have no aspirations toward or delusions about writing literary fiction. I want to write.
And you want the writing to disappear, which is really,
exactly.
Right?
I don't want people to realize they're reading. I think if I write something clever in prose, it draws attention to the writing and pulls them out. I want them to get so lost in the writing that the words disappear and it's just a vision in their minds. So if I have something clever to say, I try to have the characters say it. So the only time my authorial voice really comes out is in maybe the first paragraph or two of chapter 1. Otherwise, I try to just set the scene, in a way, Jack Webb, just the facts, man, and get out of the way of my characters. And I let action and dialogue move the story forward as much as possible. For me, when I was a kid, the book Fletch by Gregory MacDonald it made me realize I could be a novelist, or that I could make a living as a novelist. I just saw a way of telling stories that was so different from other novels that I'd been reading. Though to some degree, I would argue that Robert B. Parker and Elmore Leonard do the same thing.
Well, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit before we go back to Todd about reality and fiction, that sometimes you use stuff that's happened in real life in your fiction. Sometimes you imagine like how arson could be done, and then you go back and say, could it be done that way? Can you talk a little bit how you do the interplay of stuff that really happens?
I thought you were approaching something else, or asking about something else. My brother mentioned.
Well, I was in a circle. Let's see if I get that.
Well, I'll get to the thing I know you're going for in just a second. But Todd pointed out to me that there's a theme to my book. So he says, "Oh, you say you're not trying to write literary fiction, but you have themes in your books." I said, "No, I don't." He says, "Yeah, you do. Your themes are always how people envision themselves versus how they compare to the way others envision them, or how they compare to a fictional or cultural ideal of the way they should be behaving." And I realized, damn it, it's like John Irving with the bears and the hookers. I do repeat myself. I do have my characters always confronted by who they think they should be, how they see themselves, and how the culture looks at what they do. But I've also found that my real life is creeping into my fiction and vice versa. I just wrote a book that's coming out in January called Dreamtown about Chilean burglary tourists that are hitting homes in Calabasas that abut open space. And I had just gotten the galleys to proof when my my cameras went off on my hillside. I thought I was going to look at the cameras and see, deer or raccoons or bobcat. No, I saw 4 ninja assassins. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little, but 4 guys, dressed in hoods and gloves and, scampering up my hill. And my wife and daughter were freaked out. I was in disbelief, and then I was just pissed. And I called 911. I turned on all the lights in my backyard, and and the bad guys scurried away. And I was about to open the back door, and my wife, who's French, she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm gonna go tell them to get the hell out of our yard." She goes, "With what? There's 4 of them, there's 1 of you. What are you gonna threaten them with? Writing a really scary chapter?" And I went, "Oh God, just not only that, you leave the door unlocked so they could come in and rape and murder us."
You're
Have you
great
thought
at
about that? And by the way, you're in underwear. That too. Closed the door, locked it in. But that video of the ninja assassins creeping
It's viral. You
my
can
yard,
see it. Viewers, go get it. It's amazing.
it went viral. And the most action hero thing I did was grab the phone and call desperately for help.
It didn't just go virally. It's because you also did 800 interviews.
Well, yes, there's that too. I mean, if there's one thing I learned from Mom, it's self-promotion. But well, no, I learned 2 things from Mom. I'll be serious for a moment. We mentioned that Mom was a society columnist, and when I was like 15, maybe 16, my mom got stuck in Santa Barbara with some guy she picked up, and her column was due. So she called me and said, "Lee, you've got to sneak into the newspaper and write my column for me and file it. Don't let anybody see you. The notebooks are in my drawer. Just go in and do it." And I did it, and nobody noticed. And when she came back, I said, "Oh, your job's not so hard. Anybody with a minimum high school education could do it." And she said, "You're right." And she started going on vacations and leaving me her reporter's notebooks to write her damn column in the middle of the night. And I resented her for it because I was getting no pay for writing her column when she was away. But I learned how to write in someone else's voice, to write from different perspectives other than my own. She actually taught me a valuable lesson.
And so what's interesting that viewers don't know is that Tod Goldberg at UC Riverside uses that same technique to teach students. As the teachers get dressed, go out for parties, and then leave the students to fix everything. That's really amazing. But actually, back to you, Tod, for a moment.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Ricky Manaka actually wants to ask a question. And back on character, which is so fascinating. And like, who taught you, or where did you learn to first write characters, Tod? Can you talk a little bit how you develop characters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I sort of write from a point of view of setting begets character begets plot. I'm a big believer in that people are really influenced by where they are at any given time, and that we're different people in different places. The best writer of character that I've ever come across really is Elmore Leonard. But the book that changed me as a writer and as a reader was Rock Springs by Richard Ford, which was his first collection of short stories. It's a classic of the sort of dirty realism era, and it's highly noir. If that book came out today, he'd be a crime novelist and not writing about Frank Bascombe for 37 novels. That when I read Rock Springs, where most of the main characters are vaguely criminal and they're running from something they've done in the past, and they're having profound epiphanies, and sometimes they're having epiphanies with a gun. I read that in college, and it was like everything that I'd ever thought I knew about literature opened up in front of me, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to write stories like that. I want to write fiction like that. And so I love to write about characters who are forced to face the consequences of their actions. That drama really comes from people reckoning with the things that they have done, big or small. Lee has to reckon with the fact that he wrote Mom's columns and brought down the journalism industry to its knees, to where it is now.
No, that's not what destroyed the journalism industry. It was all those fake letters to Playgirl I got paid to write. That's what brought the industry down.
That's his true character.
That's where I learned about sex, Tom.
So, that's where character comes from me. And in writing these gangster books, setting them in Las Vegas and also in Palm Springs, I love to be able to write about those places because they're transactional. The people that come through resort towns can be anyone they want to be. They can be grifters, they can be lounge singers, they can be anyone, and people will accept them for what they say. And in that way, writing about character becomes a lot easier for me because these people become wild cards. You never know exactly what they're going to do because they are victims of their own circumstance, and the setting allows them to act in a way that they might not be able to act in any other place.
Yeah, and again, the chat continues to go, just shout outs from people. Mary Haltine says she has lots of Lee Monk's books, love writing silent stories. Your editor, Dan Smetanka, says, beware French ninjas. And Deborah Rabin writes about the Harvey Mape stories, and you guys are having a chat about that in the chat. So for those of you who are curious, jump to the chat, because and Cindy Wood says, the Low Desert is beautifully written. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
now we come to the point of where, okay, so say, and you, Lee, you can start, and Todd, you can go to the older to younger, not old, about your latest book now, and say you can talk directly to the audience and say why people should get Malibu Burning, which is a fantastic read, by the way. But you okay, so pitch Malibu Burning to our folks.
Well, they should get it because I have bills to pay, Sandra.
Yeah.
I may need to get my own hip
Especially
replaced.
now with the invaders and the wife and the doing the accent and stuff like that. She's
That's
gonna
expensive.
sue you for doing that accent. So
Malibu Burning is not a departure for me. I've been writing police procedurals for some time, and I wanted to get back to writing a big, exciting heist novel because I enjoy them so much, and I kind of miss writing on that bigger stage. But I also was aware I don't want to leave my police procedural fans behind. So I wanted to find a way to marry the two genres, the police procedural with the big, exciting heist novel, Donald Westlake kind of heist novel, and the kind of novels I wrote with Janet Ivanovich. And I had toyed with the notion of a heist being pulled off during the biggest wildfire in California's history. But I thought, I can't really write about a wildfire. I did it in my book, Lost Hills. I'd be repeating myself. What if it's the same fire, but from a different perspective? And by the way, I wrote Lost Hills long before the actual Woolsey fire. It's an entirely fictional fire, but once again, reality stole from me, plagiarized from me. But as far as the police procedural goes, I didn't want to tell just another story about homicide detectives. I'm already doing that. So I decided to write about two arson investigators, which I really came to resent because all I know about arson is that you strike a match and you light something with it. I knew nothing about arson investigation. So that meant I had to get a whole bunch of very expensive arson investigation textbooks. I had to go out and interview arson investigators. But one of the really cool things that happened while I was researching this novel was I came up with a way to commit arson that wouldn't be detected. And I called up this arson investigator with the ATF and I told him my idea, and he cursed me. He used the F word on me. And I went, why are you saying that to me? He said, because it would work. Oh, do you want me to change it in my book? He says, no, damn it. Now we're going to have to do it. Do it? What do you mean do it? We're going to have to set some fires that way. You're going to set some fires that way? We're not going to go out in the forest and do it, Lee, but we're going to do it in our testing area. So they went out and actually used my method of setting fires and filmed it, but also went and tried to figure out how they could detect it if it was used. And then they set these fires in different conditions and sent me the videos, and it was so cool. It was just great.
Well, it is, if people want to learn to make arson in this new way, they can, but it's a fantastic read. It's a pulse pounding and big climax. So yes, and also you have bills to pay. So
I just wanted to be escapist and fun to get you away from your troubles.
Exactly. Malibu Burning. All right. And a few more shout outs before we end with Todd. Ashley Weir says, hello, Professor Goldberg, alumni, giving a shout out. Camille Mincino says, love Gangsters Don't Die. And Bobby Cox says, what a great writer's workshop that is, laughing and learning. Okay, Todd, finishing on you. You pitch us your book, Gangsters Don't Die. Go.
It's a lot like The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by my mentor, Mitch Albom, who I've so strongly loved all these years. So Gangsters Don't Die is the 4th book in a trilogy. So I wrote 3 novels and 1 short story collection about the Rabbi David Cohen, who is the Chicago hitman Sal Cupertine. But it's been 6 years since I wrote the last novel, and this one concludes the story. But it also sort of stands alone. You don't need to have read the previous 2 books. I spend about 44 pages explaining everything that already happened. And it is a novel about what happens when a bad man tries to become good, and what happens when all the things he thinks he wanted, like his wife and child who've been in witness protection for all these novels, what happens when he tries to find them, what happens when he tries to change himself. But also it's a look at Las Vegas and America during a time when we began to abdicate our civil rights for a false sense of protection. So this is 2002. This is right after 9/11, when we were living under the Patriot Act, and when they started to put cameras everywhere, and when we started to be surveilled in a really particular way. So it's drawing a lot of parallels to present day. It's also, a Blackley comic novel. The main character is a fake rabbi. And so he still isn't great all the time when he needs to quote the Talmud. And so he falls back on some old habits. Sometimes a person will come with a problem, and instead of saying something from the Talmud, he'll say something like, is a dream a lie if it don't come true, or is it something worse, which is a lyric from The River by Bruce Springsteen. So it's a concluding book in a series, but it's also an easy book to step into and get some snappy mob dialogue and learn a little bit about Judaism in the process.
Let me jump in for 1 second. Something that connects Todd and I. Todd writes literary fiction. I write escapist fiction. But one thing we both do is we write funny books. Not comic novels, but we are firm believers, Todd and I both, that humor reveals character, that humor is a natural part of life, even in the most tragic. I mean, Todd and I could tell you about horrible things that have happened to us in our family that have always had something funny alongside it. Yeah. And we don't find books that are unremittingly dark with not a single bit of humor very realistic. And we think that having humor in our books humanizes our characters. So although Todd and I write very differently, we have similar personalities and a similar approach to making our characters come alive, and humor is a big part of it.
And the bare fact also is that we like to make each other laugh, and so there's nothing better than when Lee calls me after he's read a book and says, "Oh my God, this line right here almost wet my pants." If I can get my brother to wet his pants, I've done my job.
I think that and the Velcro boobs is kind of like the perfect ending. I think that our viewers have so enjoyed this. Elle Bowling says fourth in a trilogy, loved it. Jane Heron says this is the best book she's ever seen.
She's right.
So
the one I did with Scott Turow kind of sucked. Let's be honest.
And I won't say what you said about Dean Koontz, but it was not true. All right. Well, thank you so much. The Goldberg Variations. Lee's book is Malibu Burning. Todd's book is Gangsters Don't Die. They're both fantastic and delightful and dark and also funny. So we hope you'll join us again soon. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
What a true pleasure. And now we go finally to our final guest, Jesús Trejo, the delightful, the funny, the fabulous. And I will give 30-second down on Jesús. A bit of comic relief, more comedy for the end of our show. Jesús Trejo is a Los Angeles-based comedian, actor, and writer, born and raised in Long Beach. Trejo's first stand-up special, Stay at Home Son, premiered on Showtime in 2020. He's a staff writer on Hulu's This Fool and can be seen as the recurring role of Mr. Trujillo on the Netflix series Mr. Iglesias, fantastic series, and in Alone Together, Teachers, and Hentified. Jesús is also a host of Tacos con Todo. I say it a little bit wrong in this interview, because of course I'm on the pain meds from my hip stuff, but Tacos con Todo, a web series where he navigates LA with celebrities and they eat tacos and it will make you hungry. He's one of the authors coming to the Orange County Children's Book Festival on October 1st at Orange Coast College. His fantastic new book is Papa's Magical Water-Jug Clock, being published simultaneously in English and Spanish. We spoke to him just 2 days ago. Roll tape. Oh my goodness, Jesús, we're so excited to have you on. Welcome to Bookish. Woo!
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's so much. Your work is so fantastic and pretty wide ranging, even though you're a pretty young guy. You've done stand-up comic, television, You're a taco expert. We want to talk about that, of tacos for todos, if I'm saying that correctly. But now you have a book coming out, like a children's book, that is also fantastic, and you'll be down in Orange County in the book festival there. So for those new to the Jesús Trejo phenomenon, can you talk a little bit about how your journey, if you will, your history from Long Beach to where you are now? Can you tell us about what you were as a kid, just how you got started, etc.?
Yeah, you know, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. This is super cool. Yeah, I'm a Jesús Trejo. I'm Jesús Trejo, stand-up comedian, born and raised in Long Beach, California. My whole upbringing has been here in beautiful Long Beach. You know, been a stand-up comedian now for actually 17 years as of a week ago. So storytelling has been a big part of my life, you know, since I was a little kid. But I've gotten paid to do it for the last 17 years. So it's the thing that I've done for most of my adult life, telling stories and trying to make them funny, and yeah, just storytelling in all of its forms. You know, we're screenwriting most recently, the book, on stage. So
I'm interested with your storytelling because your family, I mean, your mother, who is, I mean, you'll take something like ripped jeans. Your father thinks, you know, why are you wearing jeans that make people think you make less than you do? And then your mother sews up the jeans. So I think there's so much of your parents and your comedy. I wonder, is that how your comedy started? Or did you eventually go, wait a minute, I should talk about my family because they're, did you start talking about your family, or did you discover it along the way? Because they're so wonderful.
I think I started as a stand-up comedian. I started off as a one-liner, you know, you guys like Stephen Wright, you know, Mitch Hedberg and Ronnie Dangerfield. It's like this I was obsessed with like the storytelling aspect, but a setup punch at a time, if that makes sense. So I was enamored with that. That was my first introduction into stand-up. But with time, even with the one-liners, they were very autobiographical. You know, they reflected me in a certain way. But the more I did it, I talked about my family, you know, and stand-up. I think the big rule there is not that there's any rules, but it's like you talk about what you know. And I mean, who better to talk about my family, my upbringing than me? So it's like I started to find that there was a lot of people that were resonating with my stories. They were, you know, they were seeing themselves in my upbringing, whether they were an only child or knew that weird only child that had a ton of imaginary friends. It's like, you know, so it's like storytelling is so cool because one of two things happens. I started to find out early on, which was either they relate to you or they're drawn to your story and they want to know more. So I think, you know, it's like being able to talk about my mom, my dad, as like the father-son dynamic, the mother-son dynamic, the you know, being an only child, you know, in a city like Long Beach, what that upbringing was like. And, you know, the more, excuse me, the more I opened up, the more I started to see people kind of resonating with my story. There's a real fun saying that I like to, that I really subscribe to. It's like commonality is found in the specificity. Like the more, like the specificity just opens up a world of commonality that like one would be very surprised. I mean, my kid's book most recently has been nothing short of a ton of surprises just because the way it's resonated and with whom it's resonating with. So yeah, stand-up did that for me.
Talk a little about that, about how you came up with the story of your book, and then what you experienced with reader response when it came out.
Yeah, so the story came about. This is something I've always wanted to do. I was a bookworm. I was hanging out at a library from a very young age. My mom dropped me off, and I just kind of run amok and read books eventually, you know. But the library was my safe space. I grew up, you know, reading and drawing and, you know, wanting to have a children's book of my own one day, and it finally happened. And the story I was able to tell was of my upbringing. You know, I worked with my father. My father was a gardener. My mom was a nanny. You know, she took care of kids out in Palos Verdes. And you know, this story is basically an inside joke that my father and I had. My dad convinced me as a little kid when I had to work with him, you know, it's like Saturday mornings. He convinced me that he had this water jug and he can tell what time it was based on how much water was in the jug. And I mean, when a parent tells you that as a kid, you're like, you know, like that's amazing. And then my dad went on to say that once the water is gone, that's how he knew it was time to go home. And I mean, I took it at face value. And one day I wanted to go home early because you're a kid, you want to watch cartoons, you don't want to be working out in the field with dad. So I started wasting water. You know, I was drinking a lot of water, filling up dog bowls, and you know, so it's like this kind of sweet story that my dad and I, inside joke that we had for a long time, became the basis of the story. And you know, I was very happy to incorporate the, I call it the Pixar element of it, that you know, time and water, they're very precious and they shouldn't be wasted. You know, it's like that's the big takeaway of this book. But ultimately, this is a day in the life of my upbringing. And you know,
and what I love about it is, and it's like I'm a daughter of a Chinese father, immigrant, you know, so it's I think this story is, what's wonderful about it is often in Los Angeles or Southern California, you know, it's kind of like, you know, from white people, gardeners are them, and then they show up on this other day, and it's in your story. I love how joyous it is and how fun it is. And it's like, for this, if you can see it, it's like, it's really a fun day. It's like, buenos dias. It's like, finally, it's Saturday, the day I get to help Papa at work. And it's like, it's the start of the weekend, and it's really full of joy. And I think that the drawings in it are also fantastic. You know, you have these and they look like, and again, like Spanish is not ever like luchaderas or whatever, like wrestlers, right? About
yeah, and that's a big
right.
shout out to Eliza Kinks, who was the illustrator on the book. I mean, she just, you know, we've talked about it before where it's like, you know, as a stand-up comic, I get to go on stage and I write the jokes and I perform them. And there's a second, you know, channel of communication that I have, which is act outs. I can mime something. If I'm talking about, you know, something as simple as a big hat, I could really like, you know, use my arms and like kind of this mime factor, but I don't get to use that when I write. But Eliza Kinks has been able to bring what I like to call like visual punchlines, like her animation, the lens, the colors, the expressions. I mean, she was basically bringing my words to life, you know, bringing the physical punchlines, and it's visual punchlines, I should say. And I'm very lucky. I feel like I landed on my third illustrator on the first try. You know, it's like thanks to my wonderful editor Maria Russo, who introduced us. So.
Yeah, no, and she's also great. I actually know her as well in another life, and she's really
great.
wonderful and such an advocate for fantastic children's books and children's literature. And I think that what you do is so wonderful and transformative that you take, and I think that one of, in your stand-up comedy special, in many of your stories, especially in your earlier comedy, you chose something that is so vulnerable, that could be potentially vulnerable about yourself, and you made it the most. When you talk about gestures and stuff, it made me think of that, where you had a comb over for a long period of time, and you really, you know, about living at home as a kid when you're in your 20s. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of that piece of comedy and describe to the viewers who have not seen it about the evolution of the comb over bit, if you will, because it's
so I can tell you that, you know, as a young comic, I was a very slow learner. It took me a while to really understand all the techniques and what stand-up comedy required of the performer, and I realized with time that it's like truth, you know, everything needs to be based in reality. It needs to come from a real place for it to resonate, whether it's observational, personal, what have you. Even insult comedy, like it has to derive from a real place for it to land. It's just the mechanics of it. It's the physics of wordplay and, you know, that kind of thing. So I started to understand that the more vulnerable I was, the better it was going to be. And that, to me, the comb over joke specifically that you're talking about was one of the first jokes that I was able to find success as a stand-up, where it would land, and it was like, you know, very few people in the audience had comb overs, but just visually it was self-deprecating. It was funny. It was like it told a story. It was you can even say it was a prop. I used all these elements that really allowed me to gain a certain level of confidence as a performer. And I think that, you know, I used to move around, and there was like this comb over hair, and with time, you know, eventually I had to shave it off. And, you know, I shaved like 20 minutes from the act. It was like a 20-minute joke, but it allowed me to bring that confidence that I found with that joke with me. And yeah, there was a couple guys in the audiences, you know, couples would come up, and, you know, the partner would be like, oh, I'm trying to get him to shave his head too. So it was like, even after the fact, it still was resonating in some way, because I always brought that self to the stage. I gave wholeheartedly on stage, and I think people were kind enough to receive and reciprocate.
Yeah, no, and it's fantastic. And I think because stand-up comedy can be so sort of combative and competitive and stuff, and to take
Sure.
something that vulnerable. And I think that there's a bit in one of your Tacos for Todos episodes
Yeah.
where actually Pauly Shore is there. And I'm a Southern California girl from the 1970s. So I've actually been a fan of, I know all of his movies and stuff. That's sort of the era that I totally grew up in. And about going on tour with him and learning a lot as you go, and you keep at it. And that was something that you learned, and which is sort of a pivot to, and my second to last question is, and the Tacos por Todos vote, where you go and sample tacos in LA, and you talk to comedians. How did that come to be, and what do you love about that show particularly?
You know, this show came to be because So Complex magazine, which is now an online kind of video, it started off as a kind of paper magazine deal. It became more video content. And one of the branches that they have with Complex was this channel called First We Feast. That's the name of the channel on YouTube. And they do Hot Ones, if you're familiar with that show, where celebrity guests come in, they eat, you know, hot wings, and the questions get spicier and spicier, if you will, you know. So one of the shows that they took on was Tacos con Todo. They reached out, they casted me as a host, and I get to eat and hang out with comics and get paid for it. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like, what an awesome opportunity to be able to sit down with some peers, some mentors, you know, comics that I didn't know before. We talk shop, we talk life, we talk everything in between, and we do it over some great Mexican food, which, you know, outside of Mexico, you know, LA has become the capital of the embassy of Mexican deliciousness. So it's been really good. We've done 3 seasons, and hopefully we're going to do more. But yeah, it is a super fun show. One of the things I do like about the show is that we also get to showcase the families behind the restaurants and the recipes, which I think is very important. You know, it's like being able to bring in that history and the heritage element, and celebrate these families that have come from Mexico with, you know, with the American dream in mind, and they've been able to, you know, experience that thanks to this delicious food and the customers they've cultivated over the years. So we also make a point to showcase and celebrate the restaurants and the families behind them too.
Which is so Southern Californian. It is so, as your book is, just celebrating these families. I think the humanity, the down-to-earthness, not just of tacos and burritos, and you'll get hungry watching the show, I'm telling you. And, you know, and also families who work together and share together and savor together. And I think it really dovetails in beautifully with your book. And we're going to put all the links to how people can see you. And
Thank you.
It's just really been a pleasure to chat with you, and you're an inspiration to many, and also to kids who will be reading this and go, you know what, I can be funny and tell stories too. And my family may not be as weird as I think they are, or maybe they are, and I'm as weird. Whatever. So,
You're so sweet. Thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real treat. Thank you.
Abrazos. Thank you.
Take it away, Sam. I think we're going to hear from Eric. Oh, it was fun.
What a great night. I laughed so hard. Thank you, Sandra. And thanks, Jesus. And of course, the brothers Goldberg, Todd and Lee, for joining us today. Laughed so hard I snorted water out of my nose. Also, thanks to our production manager, Julie Corlett. We're going to see you all, I hope, everyone next month for our special guests, Chuck Palahniuk and Amy Ferris. And I have to say Happy New Year to those celebrating Rosh Hashanah. Also, don't forget today's books are available at Once Upon a Time Bookstore. And if you'd like to share your thoughts or have suggestions for us or just additional questions or want to tell us how much you laughed and snorted water out of your nose, please email us at events@scng.com. We're going to end with a word today from my colleague, books editor Eric Peterson, who's been lurking there in the chat. He's here to tell us about all the great books coverage coming up in our newspapers and in his must-read weekly newsletter, The Book Pages. All right, take it away.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm sure you've already talked about this, but there are the brothers in the bathtub. I know you probably talked about it already, but I'm pre-taping this for reasons I can't tell you right now, just because they're boring. Anyway, but this weekend we've got a piece on Bernie Taupin talking about his new memoir, Scattershot. Peter Larson talked to him. It's great. It's a really nice, long piece about him. We also are talking to, in the book pages that I write, I've got some stuff with some great crime writers that you're not going to want to miss. You can get that now if you already subscribe, or I'll be posting it online too. Plus, I will just give you a tease. There's the tease. That is a book by an author, Lou Berney. I'll give you a longer tease. How's that? Dark Ride by Lou Berney. It comes out on Tuesday. It is a fantastic book. I loved it. I talked to Lou, and I will be bringing you guys that interview shortly, and look forward to it. He's really a lovely guy and a really wonderful writer. Okay, thanks all. Take care.